For nearly 4 years, a domestic terrorist, someone who planted viable bombs outside the headquarters of both major political parties, just walked free. And this wasn't because law enforcement didn't have evidence, no. It was, allegedly, because of a deliberate or maybe a profoundly negligent bureaucratic choice to just deprioritize a major national security threat. So how could federal agents, in possession of specific forensic evidence, I'm talking a shoe print, credit card data, how could they systematically overlook the person responsible for this? What does this staggering failure tell us about the current state of justice? We are going to uncover the full story. Stay with us as we break this down in our in-depth discussion right here on News Focus Podcast. And if you find our reporting valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to support our channel. We truly appreciate it. Okay, so the news broke, and it really did send shockwaves through the whole community. After a search that, it seemed like it was going to be a cold case forever, FBI agents swarmed a quiet neighborhood in Northern Virginia, just about 20 miles from D.C., and they finally made an arrest.
And that's the thing. It's the conclusion of a 4-year search that, when you look at the evidence they had, really should have taken a fraction of that time.
So who is the suspect?
He's been identified as Brian Cole Jr., a 30-year-old male. And according to reports, he has some alleged anarchist ties.
Anarchist ties?
Yeah. But the sheer length of this delay, that's what demands such intense scrutiny here. For 4 whole years, a man accused of attempted domestic terrorism.
Targeting the infrastructure of our political system.
Exactly. He was just blending back into his civilian life. The core question for everyone, from law enforcement to you listening at home, is, was this an oversight? Or, as the critics are now claiming, was it strategic negligence?
And the gravity of this crime really needs to be front and center here. This wasn't just a threat scribbled on a wall. This was a fully realized, calculated plot.
Absolutely.
Let's just revisit the facts of the case, just to set the stage. The crime scene, the devices themselves.
The timeline is incredibly precise. On the evening of January 5th, 2021, you have surveillance footage that captures this hooded figure just walking through Capitol Hill.
Carrying a backpack.
Right, carrying a backpack and moving with a very specific, very deliberate route. It's clear the placement was calculated to create maximum disruption.
So walk us through the actual deployment of these bombs.
Of course. So the first device, it was placed outside the Democratic National Committee, the DNC headquarters. That happened at 7:54 p.m.
And this was a homemade explosive device.
Yes, positioned very strategically, likely near a walkway or some kind of entry point. Then, just 22 minutes later, at 8:16 p.m., the same hooded figure places a second, identical device. This time, it's outside the Republican National Committee, the RNC.
And that dual targeting hitting both parties, that's so crucial to understanding the motive here, isn't it?
It's everything. Because it suggests this wasn't about one party over the other. This was an attack on the entire political system. And that motive is still a key question.
And we have to emphasize, as the sources do, these were not fakes. These weren't theatrical props.
No.
The FBI confirmed these as viable bombs.
Viable is the key word.
Yeah.
They were constructed using, common but very effective components. You've got galvanized pipes for the casing, these rudimentary but still functional kitchen timers, and homemade black powder.
Designed to cause harm.
Designed to cause harm, potentially fatalities. This is what separates this event from a simple threat or a hoax. This was an attempted use of force. The sources we're looking at underline that if these devices had functioned as intended, the fallout would have been immense.
Okay, so this is where the story pivots. It goes from a shocking crime to what many critics are calling a monumental, almost unbelievable institutional failure. You have viable bombs placed in high security areas right in the heart of the Capitol, and yet they sat there undetected for 15 hours.
It's that 15-hour window that just fundamentally challenges the entire security apparatus leading up to January 6th.
How is that even possible?
Well, these headquarters are in an area that was, by definition, supposed to be undergoing intense security pre-screening. Sources are revealing that the Secret Service and various federal agents were reportedly sweeping these neighborhoods the day before the protest.
So their entire job at that moment was to secure that area.
Exactly. Their mandate was to make sure that whole zone was secure for the events of January 6th.
And yet, 2 viable pipe bombs, we're talking cylindrical devices, placed right outside the entrances were, and I'm quoting here, completely overlooked.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like a simple mistake. That sounds like a profound organizational lapse.
It points to one of two things. Either an extraordinary degree of negligence during those sweeps, or a really serious misallocation of resources and focus. I mean, just think about how hard it would be to miss something like that, placed so overtly in such a sensitive area.
It's that failure, that initial failure, that really feeds the most cynical claims here.
It does, because that oversight is what leads people to speculate about things like potential internal corruption. Now, that's just a claim, it's not a proven fact, but you can see why people are asking those questions.
And the practical consequence of this lapse wasn't just the danger, it was operational chaos on January 6th itself.
Absolutely. The bombs were only discovered the next day, right as, quote, the Capitol chaos was already unfolding.
So at the worst possible time.
The worst possible time. It meant that instead of law enforcement being fully focused on the Capitol building, on the breach, on managing that growing crowd, suddenly, critical assets had to be diverted.
You mean bomb squads, tactical units?
The bomb squads, specialized tactical units, FBI investigators, all immediately diverted to manage 2 live explosive threats in 2 separate locations. This diversion, which sources describe as a very odd detail given the circumstances, it just compounded the crisis at the Capitol.
So the delay amplified the threat.
It amplified the immediate operational threat, and it totally diminished the capacity to respond to the riot.
Which brings us to the next chapter of this story. The claims of, well, deliberate negligence. Because finding the bombs is really only the beginning of this institutional failure story.
Right.
To really grasp the gravity of this 4-year delay, you have to look at what the FBI actually knew, and more importantly, what they allegedly chose to ignore.
What really stands out in the source material is just the sheer volume and the quality of actionable evidence the FBI had right away in the immediate aftermath.
Okay, like what?
Well, they had extensive surveillance footage capturing the person's movement, their gait, their clothing. They had cell phone tower data, which could map the suspect's path with incredible precision. And they conducted over 1,000 initial interviews.
So this is the foundation of any modern federal investigation.
It's the bread and butter. But the real investigative goldmine, the lead that should have cracked this case wide open almost immediately, was the forensic evidence left behind in the snow.
The shoe print.
Exactly. They identified the perpetrator's exact shoe print.
And we're not talking about just a vague outline.
No. This was a game changer. Investigators were able to determine the specific make and model of the footwear, Nike Air Max Speed Turfs.
Which, for anyone outside of law enforcement, that sounds incredibly specific.
It is. This is not some common, generic running shoe. The unique sole pattern, the specific model. Yeah. It's highly traceable, especially if the shoe was bought recently.
So let's elaborate on this because this really explains the irony here. When a federal agency finds a specific clue like that, what's the standard procedure? What kind of timeline are we talking about?
In a high-priority terrorism case, that finding should generate immediate high-tempo follow-up. You identify the exact shoe, you can immediately target retail distribution networks.
And we know from the sources they did that.
They did. The investigative team was able to subpoena credit card and sales records from major retailers like Foot Locker, other national chains. They even managed to narrow down the size of the shoe.
So just to be clear, they have a specific shoe model, a narrowed down size, and the ability to link sales data to actual locations and potentially actual customers.
Exactly.
The suspect pool should have shrunk dramatically, down to, what, a few dozen people, maybe?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
If you can narrow down the potential buyers of, say, a size 10.5 Nike Air Max Speed Turf purchased in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area in late 2020 or early 2021, you have actionable leads.
And you cross-reference that with the cell tower data.
Exactly. You cross-reference those names with the cell tower data from the DNC and RNC area around 8 p.m. on January 5th. That combination of forensic and digital evidence, it should have yielded a positive ID, or at least a very small group of primary suspects, within weeks.
Not 4 years.
Not 4 years.
Yet, despite all of this concrete data, the source material says the investigation yielded, quote, nothing for 4 long years under the previous leadership.
And this is where the questions about the institution itself turn into claims of deliberate obstruction.
Right, because this failure to connect what seemed like very high-quality dots is why that congressional report released in January is so damning.
It's incredibly damning. The report specifically looked at this stagnation, and it found that the FBI did, in fact, gather a promising collection of data and identified numerous persons of interest in the early weeks. They had the foundation.
So they had a great start, but then the progress just halted. Why?
The report explicitly states that resources were redirected. The conclusion was stark. There was, quote, minimal, meaningful advancement toward apprehending the suspect.
Wow.
And what's really illuminating is the timeline they provide. The initial investigation, the one with that strong start we just talked about, it essentially stalled by the end of February 2021.
Less than 2 months after the incident.
Less than 2 months. The resources were pulled almost as quickly as the initial evidence was gathered.
Okay, so this moves us right into the central controversy, which is the claim of political motive. If the evidence was so strong, why would the FBI just let it stall?
Well, the claim being advanced by critics and these investigative sources is that the FBI deprioritized the pipe bomb case. It was complex, it was forensic heavy, and they did this, allegedly, in favor of prosecuting the January 6th Capitol rioters.
And the argument is what? That it was just easier?
Basically, yes. The argument is mechanistic. The J6 rioters, their faces were clearly visible on camera. It made those arrests much simpler, much faster. It required a lot less complex forensic matching.
And the assertion here is that this focus on the J6 rioters served the political narrative of the previous administration, that narrative being the heavy emphasis on the threat of the J6 insurrection.
That is the core accusation being reported, that the FBI poured enormous resources into cases that were politically expedient, cases that supported that specific narrative, while letting a bona fide domestic terrorism case involving viable explosives just languish.
It's an alleged choice between rapid, high-visibility convictions and the much more laborious, technically challenging work of tracking one highly dangerous person.
Exactly, and let's just quantify that discrepancy, because the comparison of the effort it's startling.
Okay, lay it out.
All right, so for the pipe bomb case, the Bureau conducted over 1,000 interviews. They reviewed 39,000 video files, and yet for 4 years, they couldn't identify a single suspect.
With all that information.
With all of that. But conversely, during that exact same time frame, they successfully processed and prosecuted hundreds of J6 participants with far less complex evidence, often just facial recognition.
The contrast is significant. A case with bombs at the core of American political life was left to collect dust, while cases with far less severe charges were fast-tracked.
And this leads directly to the core charge from critics of the previous FBI leadership, that the prioritization was allegedly based on serving a political narrative, not diligently securing the public from an ongoing terrorist threat.
Sources who are sympathetic to the current reforms, they frame this whole period as being reflective of the previous administration's penchant for weaponizing the law against their political enemies.
It's a very, very strong claim. It suggests the decision was conscious, not just an accident or bureaucratic fumbling.
And it's crucial here that we remain neutral. We're reporting on these claims, which are present in the source material. We're not endorsing them, we're just laying out what is being alleged.
Exactly. The question isn't whether the J6 rioters deserve prosecution. The question is whether the resource drain on those very visible cases led to the necessary abandonment of a greater, though less publicly visible, threat involving actual explosives.
The sources suggest a systemic tilt.
A tilt toward political outcomes rather than impartial public safety.
Okay, this brings us to the critical inflection point in the whole investigation. The changing of the guard, and how a huge shift in focus within the Bureau led almost immediately to the arrest.
This breakthrough is tied directly to new leadership. The source material highlights that the case was specifically taken over by new officials, Director Patel and Deputy Director Bonino.
And this wasn't just a routine reassignment.
No, this was a decisive, reported mandate to break the institutional inertia that had just plagued this case for years.
So what was the first key change they made?
They treated it, right away, as a cold case that needed a fresh start. They formed a dedicated cold case task force.
Which means what exactly?
It means bringing in personnel who have no prior connection to the investigation. They were flying in task force officers from other districts, other specialized units. The mandate was to conduct rigorous internal evaluations of everything that had been done before, and, maybe most importantly, to rerun every single lead.
Even ones that had been previously dismissed?
Every single one. They basically operated under the assumption that the evidence had to be in there somewhere if the initial work was competent.
And this leads us to the most damning finding of all, one that seems to confirm these claims of negligence. The evidence was literally there the entire time.
Law enforcement sources are now admitting, with extraordinary candor, that the suspect could have been arrested years ago if investigators had simply connected the dots. That suggests a failure of synthesis. That's a good way to put it. The FBI had all these discrete pieces of the puzzle, the shoe purchase data, the cell records, the video, but they failed to put them together in the right sequence. The phrase used in the sources is blunt. The evidence needed was literally sitting on their desks.
So what was the specific step taken about 6 weeks before the arrest that finally broke it open?
This was the truly critical operational decision. Investigative sources confirmed that the new director and deputy director made the conscious choice to remove the original agents from the pipe bomb case entirely.
Wow.
They assembled a completely new, unjaded team to just look at the cold evidence file.
That is a huge move. I mean, that implies a lack of confidence not just in the process, but maybe in the commitment of the original team.
It suggests a belief that the failure was systemic, a combination of institutional blindness and perhaps, as the critics say, a conscious redirection of attention.
And I imagine that didn't go over well internally.
Not at all. It's vital to note that this restructuring was met with friction. Sources report initial resistance from FBI veterans who resisted the change.
Institutional inertia.
It's powerful. It's difficult for veterans to accept that new leadership came in from the outside and solved a case they've been sitting on for years just by re-examining their own files.
But the fresh approach, using new ideas and new technologies, it worked.
It did. The success validates the new methodology. And when they say new technologies, it's not always about brand new inventions. It could be about applying advanced techniques to old data.
Like using AI to resort those 39,000 video files.
Exactly. Or using more refined geofencing warrants to pinpoint devices at the crime scene that previous sweeps might have missed. It was the fresh eyes, combined with these new applications, that allowed them to make the connections that led directly to the suspect.
So we can really summarize the consequence of this delay pretty clearly. Whether it was, quote, deliberate suppression or bureaucratic negligence, the outcome was the same.
A domestic terrorist walked free for nearly 5 years. The key takeaway here, regardless of the intent, is just how fragile public security is when institutional priorities are misaligned. When a complex investigation is deprioritized, the risks to the public just multiply exponentially.
So moving on to the broader dynamics here, this arrest is being seen as one of the first really tangible successes that demonstrates the consequences of this administrative shift. And this inevitably feeds into that ongoing, highly charged discussion around deep state dynamics and deep state corruption within the Bureau.
That term, deep state dynamics, is being used by sources to describe these entrenched elements within the FBI veterans, longtime administrators who might resist new leadership because of institutional or even political loyalties. The source material confirms the internal belief is that, quote, some deep state corruption remains for sure, but that the tide is beginning to turn.
And that change in sentiment is a fascinating institutional development in itself. How is the new leadership overcoming that skepticism?
It really just comes down to results. Skeptics who maybe initially dismissed the new director and deputy director as just political appointments are now confronting undeniable success.
Right.
When new leadership comes in and within months solves a complex, high-profile domestic terrorism case that the old guard couldn't solve in 4 years, it fundamentally shifts the internal dynamic. The sources say the new approach is getting bad guys off the street, which is, the ultimate currency of trust for federal agents.
It's that classic saying, success breeds trust. The arrest of the pipe bomb suspect, based entirely on existing evidence, powerfully validates the new directive to, as they say, break glass at the FBI.
And that phrase, break glass, is really key. It describes a mandate to disrupt the status quo, to overcome that institutional inertia. This case serves as a powerful, real-world demonstration that the new priority is on high-stakes criminal investigations and internal accountability, rather than just maintaining old routines or political focuses.
But even with this huge breakthrough, the investigation isn't over.
Not even close.
What are the next immediate steps?
Well, officials are being very clear that the arrest is just the beginning. The focus now shifts from who did it to understanding the full extent of the plot.
So what are the key questions?
There are 3 big ones. First, determining Brian Cole Jr.'s specific ideology. Was it purely anarchist or something else? Second, what was the precise motive for targeting both the RNC and the DNC? And third, maybe the most critical for national security, were co-conspirators involved.
So he might not have acted alone.
Exactly. The investigation is going to widen to establish whether he acted alone or was part of a much broader network.
This leads us into our final segment, where we sort of place this major institutional reform story within the context of the broader political landscape. The sources are highlighting that the new leadership's success is being mirrored, according to its supporters, by some pretty significant economic success as well.
That's right. The sources are presenting these two narratives, institutional reform and economic success, as intertwined proofs of a functioning, competent administration.
So, as the administration is tackling these inherited problems, like this FBI cold case, they're also navigating a political environment where their rivals are increasingly rallying around this new theme of affordability.
hmm And this affordability focus is reportedly inspired by a recent election and is now, well, pervasive in the legacy media, which the sources we're looking at describe as being mouthpieces for the Democrats.
The claim being advanced is that this narrative is a politically strategic maneuver.
It seems so. The idea is that despite strong overall economic indicators, the opposition is focusing specifically on the high cost of living, using words like affordability, constantly in headlines to try and create this compelling counter-narrative that resonates emotionally with voters, regardless of the macroeconomic data.
Which brings us to the counter-narrative on the economy, which presents the exact contradiction. What are the specific economic successes being reported that challenge this affordability crisis narrative?
Well, the reports detail a really strong defense of the new administration's economic performance. They start by acknowledging the difficult starting point, inheriting the worst inflation crisis in 40 years, which they attribute directly to the pandemic and the policies of the previous administration.
But they claim the current administration's actions are turning things around.
They do, specifically unleashing American energy and slashing regulations. And these actions are reported to be translating directly into relief for consumers.
And there are tangible proof points.
There are. The sources highlight that gas prices are reportedly at some of the lowest levels seen in the last 4 years, which provides immediate relief at the pump.
And beyond gas prices.
Beyond that, the data points to exceptional overall economic health. Wages are up, which demonstrates real income growth for workers. And most significantly, the job market has recently added nearly 120,000 new jobs.
With the crucial detail that these jobs have mostly gone to native-born Americans.
That's the detail they emphasize. And that job increase figure wasn't just good, it defied expert consensus.
So,
We're told that the job increase beat all 67 forecasts in Bloomberg's economic survey. That is a stunning affirmation of growth. On top of that, the stock market continues to hit all-time highs.
so when you put all that data together,
When you synthesize it, rising wages, strong job growth beating all forecasts, a record market, decreasing energy costs. The assertion being made by these sources is that the new administration is reshaping the entire economy.
so supporters of the new leadership are presenting this holistic picture. Competence in solving complex inherited failures like the FBI pipe bomb case, while at the same time delivering what they see as overwhelming economic success. And this directly contrasts with the affordability theme being used by the opposition.
It creates a really challenging dynamic for the political opposition. They have to rely on amplifying these localized concerns about cost of living, but they're doing it in the face of what supporters call widespread evidence of institutional reform and macroeconomic vitality. The message being sent is one of comprehensive, effective governance cleaning up problems while achieving tangible results. As we conclude this deep dive, the tension remains palpable. The successful arrest of the pipe bomb suspect is a major victory, but it really serves primarily to underscore the profound risk that's created by institutional failure. When core evidence is ignored for 4 years due to alleged political or bureaucratic misdirection, public trust is severely eroded, and public safety is critically compromised. Thank you, and thank you to our listeners.
That's all for this deep dive, but it leaves us with one critical question for you to consider. If the evidence needed to protect the public from a domestic terrorist was present all along, requiring only a change in management to solve the case, what other fundamental truths critical to our security and justice are currently buried under bureaucratic neglect within our institutions?